Coogs House. The Houston Cougars dropped another Big 12 road game, but should they have taken a moment to think about it first?
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, today the podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater can't stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you can listen to the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you found us on YouTube, welcome back to the YouTube channel. It is so nice to see you again. We're doing a giveaway every 250 subscribers. The next one of this is at 2,000, and we're almost there. We're at 1925 as of the recording of this podcast. So hit subscribe, help us get there, like and comment the video, let us know you are in the contest. If you don't know what to say because you're just still perplexed about the basketball game or you're more a football guy or whatever, tell us in the comments down below, as it's so cold outside, do you put beans in your chili or not? It's very much chilly weather. Do you put beans in your chili or not? All right, so today's episode is going to be a lot about the basketball game from the weekend with TCU. Yes, Houston did fall on that one, and we need to break it down. First of all, apologies for not having it broken down earlier. I should probably lead off at the front end with the cold weather and some power outages and some potential pipe stuff and all kinds of good old-fashioned cold weather fun in Texas. Haven't had a chance to sit down and talk about this yet. So thank you all for giving me a little bit of time to get that stuff sorted out. Things are okay, we think, now. I guess when things thaw up, we'll see if the pipes are okay or not. But for now, things are okay. First thing we're going to do is some talking about the end of the game timeout situation, because that's the hot button topic out of this one. The second segment is going to be talking about other things that went right and wrong. A lot more wrong than right in losses, typically. And then the third and final segment, I want to contextualize the loss because Houston is not used to losing many basketball games. That's 2 in a row for the first time since the 2021-22 season. And I think people are trying to figure out what to make of it. Now, in this game, if you're living in a rock or you just haven't had a chance to go back and watch yet, first of all, spoiler alert, Houston lost to TCU 68-67 in Fort Worth. Now, Houston had a number of different things not go their way, but I want to play out the final 2 minutes because that's what people have really been upset about in radio call-ins, in social media, in, frankly, post-game press conferences. Kelvin Sampson was asked about in the final 2 minutes, just under the 2-minute mark. Jamal Shead made a layup on what I just call HB dive, where he just runs the basket faster than everybody else, makes a layup, makes score 64-61. J1 Roberts fouls and TCU makes 2 free throws. Ensuing possession, Jamal Shead makes a step back 3-pointer, make it 67-63. They come back down the court immediately, and TCU finds Tennyson in the corner. Tennyson, remember, is TCU's best 3-point shooter. They find him in the corner very open for a 3 to get it to 67-66. Houston comes down on, I believe it was the following offensive possession. Jamal Shead gets into the paint and is double teamed. He kicks it out to L.J. Cryer. Cryer shot fakes. They run him off the line. He gets about 10 feet away, shot fakes again, gets the defender to jump, and makes a leaping scoop shot, attempt at a layup kind of thing, but he's from a long way away. Doesn't go in. J1 Roberts gets the rebound and is fouled on it. J1 goes to the line in a 1-and-1 type of situation, up 67-66, and misses the front end. There's about 35 seconds left in the game at that moment. TCU gets the rebound and comes down. After spending a lot of clock, they are just down 1 point, finds Emmanuel Miller on a backdoor cut. Yes, they found their leading scorer in the basketball game on a backdoor cut for a wide-open layup. Houston looked like they might have been playing a lot of zone in that last couple minutes, but then it switched to man mid-possession there. Whatever the case may be, they gave up a wide-open backdoor cut. Done for what it's worth, kind of frozen dunker spot. I'm sure if this was go help on the guard. Anderson driving, gave up the backdoor cut. There's 6.7 seconds left when the ball gets through the hoop. Jamal Shead inbounds the ball to Damian Dunn. Dunn takes the ball up court, tries to run a similar kind of look that we've seen Houston run before, ends up turning the ball over without getting a shot really off. And people have been scrutinizing this play because with the 6.7 mark and the ball going through the hoop, people have been clamoring for Houston to call a timeout. And Kelvin Sampson said after the game, and I would have to say I give a hard agree with him, that he will never call a timeout in that situation. That's the right call, folks. That's the basketball coach's call. Calling a timeout in that situation gives the defense a chance to make any substitution they want, gives the defense a chance to set up a play, gives the defense a chance to talk about what you're going to try to do, and talk about what they need to do to stop that. They get to get better defenders in the game if they had offensive guys and offense defense kind of subs. A timeout only helps the defense. Without a timeout, what you get to do is do something that you've practiced. And as Kelvin Sampson pointed out in his post-game press conference, there's not a Coach in America quote that doesn't work on this. Generally speaking, if there is more than 4 seconds or less than 8 seconds, you have some idea of a semblance of what to run. And what Houston does, and what Kelvin Sampson says they did, is really not anything too terribly crazy. They get the ball to Jamal. The other shooters go to the wings outside at the run the lane. And then if you have a big in the game, they run to a dunker spot, which everyone's quickest to get to. If they're on the right side of the floor, right side, left side, right. And Jamal takes the ball to the middle of the floor, finds the open window. If it's a broken defense, so they sag off and help, he kicks it. The reason you do if we have between 4 and 8, if you have more than 8, you actually have time to set up a play, typically. If you have less than 4, you probably need to call that timeout because getting the ball to half court is going to happen on the pass, not the dribble, right? So that 4 to 8 second window when Houston at 6.7 is only time to run this type of thing. And the issue is Jamal Shead inbounds the ball to Damian, and Jamal Shead looks like he wants the ball back. Damian takes the ball and kind of runs the spot that Jamal has typically run. And honestly, as I said on Twitter, Houston could have had worse options than Dunn where he was. Dunn had 17 points a game. That's the second most points of anyone on a Houston Cougars basketball team in that game. Dunn, for what it's worth, also had the most recent non-Jamal Shead make for Houston. He made a 3 a few possessions earlier that gave Houston the lead in that game. He had a great second half, had scored an ISO and forced free throws on a couple of possessions as well in isolation multiple times. Damian Dunn was playing well. Houston could have done a lot worse than having Damian Dunn in that situation, even if he's not your first choice. Yes, obviously, the correct play would have been getting the ball back to Jamal, spacing out, maybe doing another catch and shoot 3 like you'd had a few possessions earlier, right? But on the whole, not calling the timeout and running the end of game play itself is the right move. It's always going to be the right move, regardless of the outcome. And I really, really, really hate people who play outcomes to dictate whether or not the process is right. The process was right. The process of getting to that shot or getting to a shot there was the right move. The product, the thing that came out of it, was not. And I think that's unfortunate. People are going to base everything on what happened, not what they were trying to do. Clearly, what they were trying to do was the right thing to do, right? It's what beat Memphis last year. So it beat Wichita State a couple years ago. It's what Houston does to win games all the time. I don't think it's an accident or a coincidence, I should say, that Damian Dunn, a newer to the program guy, just got here from Temple, who's been in a very different program, does things a little bit differently, was a leading scorer there at different times in his career. Got the ball and assumed his role was to now be the Jamal Shead guy. Whereas Jamal is looking for the ball back because he is used to being the guy in charge. He's been the guy in charge in that spot for several years now, right? That miscommunication, honestly, is just the growth you go through in basketball season. It's the first half of January, right? And so I understand those things happening. Obviously, would rather the ball gotten back to Jamal. Obviously, I feel confident that Jamal gets the ball in his hands. We at least get a good shot off. Obviously, I am not going to critique Sampson unless I think he's wrong, and I don't think he's wrong here. But I would point out that, this is a moment you've seen Houston do very well in. Why are we questioning this now, right? If Damian Dunn raises up, if Damian Dunn drops to a trailing Jamal, if Damian Dunn gets a shot off, are we upset about it, right? Frankly, if Jamal Shead brings the ball down, they trap him and the ball gets fumbled out because it's spilled. Are we still questioning it? Right? Those kinds of things I think are all worth asking. A year ago when they beat Memphis on a buzzer beater in the same situation, if Jamal Shead misses, are we upset he didn't throw the ball to Marcus? Like, what are we freaking out about in that? We're worried about the outcome, not how we got there. And that's a real silly thing to do. Now, I do think it's interesting to see in this instance that while you obviously want to get the ball to Shead, in the post game, Kelvin spoke on that, and he said that we just made a mistake there. Feel bad for the kid, talking about Damian. But when talking about getting the ball back to Jamal, he said in a trembling voice that he would have never thought in a million years they wouldn't have gotten it back to Jamal. And I feel like, honestly, and he didn't say this is me reading between lines, but Kelvin feels ownership over that. Kelvin is worried about, as the coach and leader of this basketball team, he thought we were to a point where the guys knew the gig there. They knew what they were supposed to do. And the obvious thing to him did not get done. And hearing his voice tremble in that moment in the post-game presser made a very human thing happen, where it's just like this human moment where he's unfortunately realizing that might have been his bad. Not in not calling the timeout, that would have been dumb, but in not having the guys prepared potentially, because we know how much Kelvin strives to have his guys prepared for absolutely everything. And that, unfortunately, was not a moment that at least those five on the floor looked prepared for. Now, speaking of being prepared, before we move on too far away, we do need to talk about how you can be prepared for any emergency going on at home, because I know that we always come here to talk about sports and escape from the real world and all those kinds of things, but sometimes real life you can't escape from, right? And according to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade, and that is scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if my wife or my son, who's just 7 months old, got sick and a supply chain issue kept them from getting the life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jase Medical. Jase Case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs and respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. All kinds of things that could happen to any one of us. Visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medication will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy, a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. So go to jasemedical.com and use code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off your order. Jase Medical. Be prepared. All right, so I want to talk some about what else went wrong in this one, because I think, while the outcome was wrong, the actual final 2 minutes, the thing not calling timeout in the last 6 seconds was not wrong, right? Now, what did go wrong in this game, frankly, was early. Jamal Shead had 2 early fouls, and the second unit offense, when he was not there at point guard, continues to be a problem. Houston had a 12-point lead at one point in the first half, went at halftime just up 2 because they continued to stall out on offense and go back on defense and foul and give up free throws. Now, stalling out on offense is interesting, and I'm an offensive-minded basketball coach in almost every sense of the word, right? Frankly, my defensive things as a basketball coach are always thinking about as an offense, what do I want them to not do, right? That's how I approach basketball. And what's interesting in looking at this is Houston, you thought coming into the season, was going to kind of have a plethora of point guards. You had Jamal Shead, but LJ Cryer's got some experience with that as well from Baylor. Emmanuel Sharp, you thought was going to come in and eventually fill into that role. Frankly, you wondered, is Terrence Arson going to have any input in that kind of spot? Arsenault's hurt. Cryer's looking like a real 2-guard. Sharp is having to do a lot of other defensive wing duties. He's really turning into more of a, shorter, stockier wing guy than a point guard type guy. You're looking for that second point guard. Is it Malik Wilson? It hasn't looked like it yet. And the offense kind of just becomes a lot of space out, my turn, your turn, isolation kind of stuff when Jamal Shead is not in there orchestrating stuff. Now, Sampson has always run pro-style offense in the sense that it's space and pace, find your areas, quick hitting actions, a lot of if you zig, I zag kind of stuff. There's nothing, scripted necessarily. It's not a Princeton offense by any stretch of the imagination. But it does feel like when Shead is not in the game, they might need some of that more structure kind of stuff. Because we saw Shead last year, frankly, run his knees into the ground by the end of the season. Right? The gauntlet they're going through in the Big 12 this year is only more difficult. It could only be more, frankly, wearing on his body. And what are they going to do without that? Who are they going to find to fill that spot when it's not him? I think it's kind of actually turning into Emmanuel. And frankly, the real trick is I think it's really turning into in half court sets, going through J1 in more of a post leading the offense kind of way. But they're still figuring out their footing in that as the season goes on. And frankly, they're at a point where they have to figure that out. But the big deal here was not that Jamal had to sit from a health perspective, but he had 2 fouls. Houston in the first half had 6 players that got 2 fouls in less than 20 minutes of a basketball game. And I understand that there are people on Twitter that question the foul count, and I would argue that there were times Houston probably should have gotten fouls called against TCU. There are not very many whistles that went against Houston that I would argue against being a whistle at all. And I understand some refs call it looser than others, but all that happened to Houston on defense in this game was TCU and Fort Worth, they were calling it tight. They weren't calling it wrong. They were calling it tight. And Houston's got to continue to find a way to find aggressive defensive schemes that don't involve playing with their hands and fouling. Now, Houston will always have, in a close competitive game, more fouls than their opponents. They just play a very physical brand of basketball. And frankly, that's why Houston plays 9 guys. They've got to have that happen. But they also can't give up 29 free throws. They can't give up 20 first half free throws, right? That took what could have been a 12 to 15 to 16, 17 point lead in a halftime down to a 2-point lead. That's the problem, right? Not having any offensive flow without Jamal because he had his 2 fouls and continually putting him on the line down the other end of the floor instead of making stops and playing with your feet and getting in front of the ball, knowing when to let a jump shot happen versus get a hand in there, and knowing when to reach and when to gamble. Those kinds of problems continue to plague Houston in conference play, and it's showing up more in conference play because games are closer, right? The other thing I'll say is in the second half of the problems while we're talking through this, they couldn't ID Tennyson. They went to zone for stretches to try and slow TCU down. I thought they did a really good job on good things of slowing TCU down. TCU is a great fast break team, loves to run the break, get out and score in transition. Houston held them to just 8 fast break points. That's impressive in and of itself. But Tennyson, kind of the lone 3-point shooting, certainly the only guy that's like that's his job, was 3 of 3 from behind the arc in the second half, and all 3 where there's no defender within 4 feet of him. Houston's got to do a better job of getting closeouts and keeping him off the line. Houston themselves, on the inverse offensively, shot just 22.2% from 3, 4 of 18. They had clean looks. They had good looks. They cannot. This team is not built to shoot the ball that poorly. I don't care what gym you're in. You've got to get closer to 30%. Any single point would have helped you win this game, right? You lost by 1 point on the road. They went 22% from 3, had clean looks. Sharp and Cryer combined to be 2 of 11 from 3. They both need to be shooting 30% or better. This team is not built to do anything if they don't, right? Now, other things that I think might have, you could argue, go well. Houston had just 5 turnovers. TCU's been forcing more like 16 a game. Again, they try to play fast. That involves playing good defense, turning the ball over. Houston didn't turn it over. That's important offensively. For as poor as I thought they were for stretch without Jamal on the floor, they didn't just turn the ball over and give the wrong team, right? Damian Dunn and Jawan Roberts, I thought, also found their individual offensive games. Dunn being in the second half, a lot of isolation type stuff. I love what he does in that mid-post 10 to 12-foot area, really old school basketball vibe. And frankly, Houston's kind of trying to find who their bucket getter is. For a tough 2-point mid-range, it might be him. Jalen Roberts, though, on offense, I don't know how he didn't have more free throws in this game, but he was all over the place, finishing around the rim, up and unders, around defense, through defense, over defense. Really, really great guy to rely on for a basket. He did not have his career high like I thought he was going to have at one point in this game. He finished with 20 points. I think he had 23 at one point last year, but 20 points and 13 rebounds in a Big 12 contest on the road when you needed it is really, really impressive. So again, those are things that went well and a lot of things that did not. And Houston, with all those things that did not go well, lost by just 1 point. But there was a Houston team that won this weekend. And I probably should also point out the Houston Cougar women's basketball team won this weekend. But the team I'm talking about is the NFL Houston team. That is the Houston Texans are moving on to the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. And as the NFL season has wrapped up, there's still time to get in on the action at America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. Right now, new customers get a $150 bonus bet back, guaranteed if you place a $5. It said place a $5 bet, get $150 back in bonus bets. Houston this weekend is an 8.5-point dog on the road in Baltimore. Now, listen, we both talked last week about how they should not have ever been a 2.5-point dog to Cleveland. They proved us right there. I get why the mathematicians have Houston 8.5-point dog this weekend, but I don't think it's going to be that far apart. I think Houston keeps it closer if they don't take the game overall. There's something in the water, and I'm telling you to do it at FanDuel because FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet a layup today. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, so Houston, as a program, has the second most wins in the last 5 years of all college basketball. Houston has not lost many basketball games. Houston has not lost back-to-back basketball games since the 2021-22 season, right? And so people are sitting here like the sky is falling after losing back-to-back road games. You're 1-2 in conference play. What is going on? Everyone's terrible. We all knew this, all knew that. And that's just such an overreaction. Iowa State's a tough team to play in. They knock off top 10 teams all the time. You were the 7th top 10 team that's lost Iowa State in the last 18 months. TCU is a very difficult team to play this year, clearly. They beat Oklahoma, a top 10 team. They were a weird call at the end of a game away from beating Kansas in Allen Fieldhouse. They're in Kansas. Okay. They would have been 3-0 and played the best 3 teams in the conference had that call not gone their way. TCU is a good team. You lost them by 1 point in their place. Iowa State's a good and difficult team to beat. You lost them by 4 points at their place. You lost 2 games by combined 5 points. In one of them, Iowa State game, a freshman had a killer Dirk fadeaway falling out of bounds. In the TCU game, their kid had a backdoor cut for a layup, and then you came down and had a chance to win the game on a jumper, and you just lost the ball, right? Like, moments shift one way or the other. You're minuscule inches from being 3-0 in the best conference in America. Now, if you trust your culture, you trust your coaching staff, you trust the kids in red and white, I feel like I'm not being crazy in saying that Houston's going to get this thing turned around fairly quickly, right? We know how close those things are, and both those games are road games, difficult place to play, tough teams to play. Now, I will say, in the grand scheme of things, that like Houston only fell to number 5, in large part because there were 13 other teams in the top 25 that lost, many to unranked teams, right? Houston had the 2 teams they lost to move into the top 25, I should point out, this week as well, because people saw them and go, oh, wow, those teams are good, right? It does, though, and this is one thing to keep an eye on in the Big 12 Conference, it does kind of make home conference games that much more of must-wins. Now, they were always kind of must-wins, but truthfully, if you want to continue to make a run at being in the top portion of this conference, you get 9 home games in conference play. You kind of need to win all those 9 now, right? And then on the road, if you were to go, let's say, even 4-5, That puts you at 13-5 in conference play. 13-5 for reference in Big 12 basketball would have won the freaking conference last year, right? Like that's how difficult it is in the Big 12. That's how difficult the thing is we signed up for, right? Now, if Houston were to go 13-5 in conference, that means they would lose 3 more conference games. And that would be the top of the conference, right? This is a difficult place to play. This gets you ready for March. There's a reason like 2021 Baylor, 2022 Kansas, 2019 Texas Tech were in or won the national championship after having played through this, right? There's a reason for that, folks. Now, I look at this and I say, okay, 9 home games. Next one, they're 1-0 in those 9. The next one is on Wednesday against Texas Tech. And Texas Tech is good. I don't mean to dismiss them. They're number 25 right now. They beat Texas to open Big 12 play. I believe they're 3-0 in conference. They're not going to be easy. I don't mean to say they're going to be easy, but you hope getting them at your place, coming off a couple poor shooting nights, the numbers come back, progress to the mean and bring you back normally, and you shoot pretty well at home. You hope the crowd shows up because it's going to be a fun one against, an in-state rival of sorts. But that's a tough one. And then, frankly, next Saturday, you got to play against UCF, Central Florida at home. And Central Florida beat Kansas right last week. Like, they're not some scrubs either. Those are both difficult games, but if you win those 2 home games, because we think at this point you kind of need to win your home conference games, suddenly you're back to 500 in conference. What are we talking about here? Right now, realistically, 13-5 again wins the conference last year, and that means they lose 3 more games. So you could lose like at Kansas, at Baylor, and one more, or some difficult places, right? Let's say realistically they go more like 12-6 or 11-7. Both of those would have had you in or tied for the top 3 in the conference a year ago, right? That means the best teams in the Big 12, the best the conference has to offer, the best conference in America has to offer, are losing 6 or 7 games in conference in a year. That's 3 to 5 more games that Houston's already lost, right? So buckle up your seatbelt. It's a difficult conference. They'll probably lose a couple more games at least, right? And that doesn't mean they're bad at basketball. Frankly, that could mean they're really, really good at basketball, right? Because the conference is that talented. It's that deep. It's that hard to win in this conference. Meanwhile, that West Virginia team you beat, they put the beat down on Texas this weekend. That A&M team you beat, they beat Kentucky in overtime. The same Kentucky that beat Kansas, right? Like these wins you have so far are adding up and stacking up to look better and better by the day, right? Your losses, Iowa State and TCU, both the teams that people in national are saying, oh, those might be good teams all of a sudden, right? So I say that to say that honestly, Houston's okay. The sky is not falling. There's no need to make dramatic over exaggerations on this, then the other thing on your Facebooks, your MySpaces, Twitch. Be real. Don't post anything silly on Be Real. It's a silly app anyway. Don't do any of that in those kind of places. It's going to be okay. Houston, it's going to be fine. Now, I will say that if you want to talk to me about it, you think I'm wrong, you think I got other things going on, or if you want to talk about how to fix frozen pipes, you can find me at Painsworth512, Painsworth 512 on any social media app. Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. I guess it's not called Twitter, it's called X. Whatever your social media platform of choice is, find me at Painsworth512. I'll be happy to talk all things Houston Cougars, Houston sports, or anything in between. Thank you all so much for being here today, making us your first listen. For a second listen, I'm going to recommend Locked On College Basketball. They've got us 5th in their poll, just like the AP does. So go check out what Andy and Isaac got going on over there. Remember, we're here each and every day, unless my internet's out or something like that. Thank you all again for making us your first listen. We appreciate each and every listener for Locked On Coogs. Locked On Coogs is a primary Locked On podcast network. That means your team, our Coogs, every day. Go Coogs.